my interest is actually in the real Hamilton, but it's just fascinating that a very, very dead person, and I mean that nicely, but he's been dead a long time, has been a stage sensation. That doesn't happen very often.
And what do you think that is down to? Because it seems to me that it was a pretty bold move by the writer, Lin-Manuel Miranda, to create a musical based on a figure that virtually very few people had heard of, and also a figure that was very peculiar to only one country's history rather than a more universal theme.
Indeed. Like, let's face it, there aren't that many musicals. In fact, I struggle to think of literally any about anyone else who's sort of like Alexander Hamilton. So we're talking about the man here who died in 1804. So that is a very long time ago. We don't have anyone alive today who would actually remotely remember him. He died in America. His whole career was in America. He was immensely important in his own time, and he has a really lovely swashbuckling personality. I mean, if you're going to make a musical about one of the founding fathers, he is probably the best one, because there are all these fabulous stories about his personality and how he stood up to people and how he argued with people, and he always seemed to win his arguments, by the way, at least as far as his version of the story goes. So I guess if you're going to do it, he's probably the best, but there's no musicals that I can think of about other 18th century statesmen. I guess it's also that the music is great. I mean, let's face it, they put some good tunes into Alexander Hamilton's mouth and all the other supporting characters. So I think it's just a combination of, he does stand out as a very interesting historical personality in his own right, and then someone wrote some absolutely banging music to go with it.
Do you think, though, that it ties in with the fact that at the moment, for whatever reason, whether it's COVID or whether it's the direction that society was going, apparently there is a greater interest in history now than ever before. And I believe in most cases that takes more the form of delving into one's own family tree or personal history. But we seem to be happier to look back and realise that there are good yarns that go back a couple of hundred years.
There are really good yarns, and there are really interesting people. And I think if you can bring it to life with good music, because I teach history, and I've actually used excerpts from Hamilton quite unapologetically, because it really helps to explain the context. It helps to put faces to names, even if they're just the actors who are portraying them. But, if you're trying to talk about 18th century politics and, say, the loss of the American colonies, well, George III singing "You'll Be Back" is as good a way as any to try to get the message across. But I think that there is a renewed interest in history, but it's being driven by the way it comes to life in popular culture so successfully.
Is that, I mean, you seem quite comfortable with it. Would some say that that's a little bit sad, that it takes a musical production to tell a historic fact in a unique way to actually get people to pay attention?
Look, Shakespeare wrote history plays. His plays were about Romans and Greeks, people who'd been dead for centuries by the time he wrote. So I think it's actually pretty legitimate, to be honest. And if it revives interest about important debates, then that's also good, because, this is a feature of North American history, but North American history matters everywhere. Like, Australia's own history has been shaped by what Americans have done very powerfully. It still matters to us who's president of the United States. So if more people gain more understanding of the past, and if it happens to be through a musical that's brought together a bit of rap and a bit other good tunes, then absolutely, I do not see a problem with that. It's a very long tradition to bring the past to life through play, through music, through drama, now through television, through film. I mean, how many people saw the brilliant movie, The Spielberg About Lincoln? Same principle, really. It's just actors portraying the past, but we learn through it.
That's right. Well, it reaches an audience that wouldn't necessarily sit down and read a textbook or read a historical book.
That is very true. And it also illuminates interesting characteristics. Like, there are many biographies written of Hamilton with the best will in the world. Some of them are quite boring, and they may not also bring to life some of the interesting facets of his personality that the musical does. You can sort of convey things about people through music and through dance that you actually can't through the written word. And like I said, Hamilton had this really swashbuckling personality. He just goes so well in a musical.
Tell me, is the story historically accurate? Because often if a movie maker, or in this case a playwright, takes over a story that from history, they will make little tweaks in the name of poetic license or dramatic license. But have they done that in this case?
It's pretty good. I mean, let's face it. I mean, it's historically inaccurate in the fact that no one bursts into song spontaneously.
Well, were you there, Marcus?
I wasn't, but I'm prepared to bet. So, I mean, like any musical, you have to make the dramatic license, give them the dramatic license that people don't burst into song. So, okay, it's totally inaccurate in that regard.
Yep.
But it's bringing people to life. It is well researched. They've actually done their scholarship. Like one of the characters is a super obscure 18th century priest called Samuel Seabury. No one has heard of him except a very narrow circle of historians. But they've done their research. They've included him. So it tells me that the people writing this have actually worked hard to bring the history to life. This isn't a gross distortion of it or anything like that at all. What's happening there? Yeah, sure, it's in rap, it's in modern music, it's in modern language, but it's got a reasonably firm basis in his life, in his times.
Do you think that this has started a trend? Do you think other writers of musicals will try to cash in on the success of Hamilton by mining the history seam, or is it a one-off?
Well, look, what's next then? Washington the musical, Lincoln the musical, Henry VIII the musical. I don't know. I think Hamilton is. I'm prepared to predict that Hamilton's more likely to be a one-off, just because Hamilton was a one-off. He really sticks out really distinctively in 18th century American history. So I don't think you could so easily wrap a musical around some of the stodgier people in their wigs who existed at the time.
No, that's exactly right. It takes more than just a place in history to get bums on seats. It
does. I mean, they might have interesting lives, but if they burst into song, I think you need an interesting personality to start with in the first place.